Dr. James Hoffmann joining me again. Thank you very much for joining me. James, tell me about yourself.
Hey, great to be back. Thanks for having me again. For those who aren't familiar with me, I'm a sport physiologist. I work for Renaissance Periodization. We do kind of all things fitness, training, nutrition, recovery, all of the above. I'm also an adjunct professor at Lehman College, so I've just kind of got my fingers in a lot of different pies in the fitness world.
All right, very good. So you had sent me, gosh, it's probably a year or so ago now. In fact, this article is dated May 13th of 2025. You wrote, composed
Man,
this.
almost a year. I didn't even realize that. Oh my
Yeah,
God.
yeah. And I know you had been working on it when we had last spoke. And that article, Periodization for Law Enforcement, it's a good read. It's a hefty read. It's a 26-minute read.
Thank you.
If you really
Appreciate
want
that.
to, if you really want to dig into it and pay attention to the points that you make in there, and some of those I want to talk most specifically because my audience is primarily tactical athletes, which include law enforcement, military, firefighters, EMS, and relevant kind of personnel. And
Yeah, for
I'd
sure.
like to talk about their readiness for duty, training, nutrition, stress management, all the things that can make them most ready and prepared for duty when they need to act and go into action. So one of them is it's been real hot button controversial conversation to have the state of law enforcement and police standards, but whether they on the local level, the state level, or the federal level, training and qualifications, and physical fitness included. Give me opinion about the current state of physical fitness standards and requirements nationwide.
Yeah, so this is a kind of a tough one, right? Because there are some, quasi-universal standards that are often used, but then there's also kind of like departmental standards and maybe a little bit different here, state to state, department to department. So there's not kind of like a one size fits all, and understandably so, everybody's needs are going to be a little bit different. But typically when you look at law enforcement assessments, it's going to look something like this, right? As many push-ups as possible in about a minute, as many sit-ups as possible in about a minute, usually like a 1.5 mile run, 300-meter sprint. Those are usually kind of like the core tests that you see kind of universally in most departments, right? And I don't love those, and we can talk about why, but I understand why they are used because they require very little equipment. There's very little barrier to entry. It's very easy to just set up and have a whole bunch of people do it. There's not a lot of safety issues outside of, somebody taking a spill and falling on their face. But you're not going to like drop a barbell on yourself, or there's not like a big technique component to all of those things, right? So there's a lot of practical reasons why tests like that are used. The downside is that tests like that are often aiming at the wrong thing, which is usually some form of muscular endurance or cardiovascular endurance, right? And every law enforcement department is going to be a little bit different. But what we find when we kind of look at the net is that most law enforcement tasks are more in that strength power world of things. You need to be able to control people, objects, move things around, push things around, right? Get to places quickly, right? It's not a matter of like running laps around your community. It's a matter of like responding, getting to somewhere effectively, and exerting control when you need to, which is typically in the world of strength and power. So the problem with a lot of these assessments is that they're just not aiming in the right direction, right? Instead of looking at what are the duties of a law enforcement officer, they're kind of just more like, I hate to use the analogy, but kind of like the presidential fitness standards of just like things you could do at a high school gymnasium kind of thing, right? So, when we're looking at like what does a, typical law enforcement officer need to do? Well, here's a good example. Like, can you pick up a limp 180-pound body and move it around? Right? How much of that is reflected in like push-ups, sit-ups, maybe even pull-ups and a mile run? Like not much, right? There's a technique aspect to it, but there's a big strength component to that. You need to just be strong as heck to be able to just pick something up that heavy, especially something that's limp, right? So the big problem that we're seeing with these assessments is that they are generally not aiming people in the right direction in terms of what they should be training for. So then you get into a situation where law enforcement officers, instead of training for the relevant fitness that they need to be successful on the job, they often are training for these either, one time or multiple time assessments, which is just kind of a waste of time in my opinion, because it's really not reflective of what they need to do. So that's kind of the big gripe that I have, and I understand why a lot of departments do this, But, right, the main things we want to see our police officers doing well, right, is strength and power oriented tasks. And we haven't even, we talked about this extensively last time, but that doesn't even include the body composition side of things, right, which is a whole other can of worms. So that's kind of like where we're at. We're using some standards that are practical but not meaningful, not helpful, instead of looking at what do we actually need to do and how do we get there.
Yeah, correct. Now, I think I can speak specifically to the state of Maryland, which is where we are located. I'm located in Annapolis, Maryland. Work for the Annapolis Police Department. So Maryland is, let me see, we're going to take a step in the right direction for the past couple of years now. We've been able to kind of customize our assessments, our mandatory physical agility assessments, to what might be considered a real world scenario based upon our city or our jurisdiction. Now, what we've come up with here, and we've been doing for 4 years now at APD, is our assessment. It involves traversing a flight of stairs up and down, 300 meter run, and then in that we climb a barrier, we drag a 150-pound dummy, and we added something that I think is fantastic when you are in a state of fatigue, particularly after you've climbed a barrier and run some stairs, is a trigger pull and see how
Mm-hmm.
accurate your
Yes.
firearms proficiency is during kind of state of physical exertion. And you kind of each officer learns a lot about themselves, and it's an assessment. That's exactly what it is. It's an assessment. This is to determine what your readiness is. Is this something that, okay, you are able to perform, or is there an area that we need to address? A lot of times what is
Yes.
seen is we kind of see it's almost predictable when you can gauge body composition, which you just said, which is very important and probably the first thing that really needs to be addressed because a lot of things downstream are going to improve when you improve body composition. Somebody who is under muscled and over fat, we can sit here and list multiple reasons why they may not perform well, be it in the real world or an assessment or an entry level test at all. But here in the state of Maryland, those are kind of some of the obstacles. So it's we have entry level standards that the Police Training Commission has set as hiring standards, which include pretty much exactly what we just said: number of push-ups in a minute, number of sit-ups in a minute, a mile and a half run, and a couple other components as well. That's fine. You get into a police academy, and hopefully you're going to do some kind of PT. But what I found from my experience in training and coaching, and my own personal experience, is it's really kind of a hodgepodge. Let me see. Let's
Yeah.
this week we're going to do CrossFit style training, and good luck doing that with somebody who's never done resistance training, doesn't have mobility,
Oh boy.
flexibility,
Yeah.
and is overweight or obese. And then we're going to do wind sprints for 2 weeks, and then we're going to test your pull ups, and so it's really kind of all over the place. I'm
Scattered.
not gonna yeah scattered. I'm not I'm not this some of these don't apply to all. There are some police academies and some programs here in the state of Maryland, and I'm sure nationwide, that are really on point. But from some of the anecdotal kind of experiences or evidence that I've heard from some officers, it's really up to the whim of whatever coach or trainer or academy instructor to put together whatever kind of PT classes, and that
I've
kind of
heard that as
spills
well.
over to what expectations are here in the rank and file, which you see. Gosh, we have a handful of CrossFitters, we have a handful of bodybuilders, we have a few long distance runners, a lot play team sports. And so this is fine recreationally, but I think, we chose a job that can be very physically demanding and can be physically demanding at just a moment's notice. We can go from being completely
Yes.
sedentary to having to move into action physically, mentally, all of the above, even after working already 8, 10 hours for 12-hour shifts that we have to. So one of the first things that you've mentioned in your article and you've talked about in the past is for each individual officer, as in I think the entire kind of law enforcement industry or career as a whole, or needs assessment analysis when we're putting together programming. And of course, addressing body composition. So tell me a little bit about what, in your professional expertise experience, is a good baseline or starting point for needs analysis, and then how do we translate that into specificity for law enforcement officers?
Yeah, yeah. So for anybody who's listening to this and going like, man, you guys are harping on this assessment stuff. Who gives a crap about all these assessments? Well, the reason why it matters is because time, energy, recovery are finite resources. Once you spend them, they're gone. So if you are spending them poorly, you never get it back and you're just wasting your time, right? These assessments are meant to help you understand what you need to be successful, either directly or as kind of like a proxy measurement, and then train and spend your time accordingly. That's why it matters, right? It's not just an academic exercise of saying like, oh, you should deadlift this much or that much or this far of a run or that far of a run. No, it's meant to be reflective of like what you actually need to do. And then we stratify your scores into basically like adequate, inadequate, or maybe we would call in sport physiology like competitive advantage, meaning like you actually are way above and beyond in this particular metric, which is really good, right? And once you can start identifying like what are going to be my main metrics that I'm looking at, what we call key performance indicators, then you can start setting up your assessments and determining how you're going to spend your training time. So how do you do that? Well, there's usually a combination of two or three big things, right? One, as you know, as an academic, you always kind of look at the scientific literature when available and say like, what do we kind of know from studies on this topic? If you have that available, great. And for law enforcement, there actually is quite a bit, both at like kind of like state, federal level. You also want to look at data collection from your own departments, right? Like what are typical cases, instances that we see here right where I'm working, right? Not just from an article, but like this is the number of incidences that we see that require this far of a run or require this hurdling of obstacles or climbing stairs or picking people up or whatever. So what are the typical things you see on the job? And then you can always fall back on your experience as well. If you don't have that like formalized more data collection to lean into, you can go, okay, well, I know that more often than not, I'm doing these kind of things, right? So we put all three of those things together and we start to say, okay, what does it mean to be an effective law enforcement officer, right? And what we find is that strength is a big one. Like we already mentioned, you need to be able to pick things up, move them around, control people, control objects, go up and down with the load. You got a lot of stuff on the strength side. Strength also translates really well into power and speed, right? So the stronger you are, the more explosive potential you're going to have, the faster you're going to run, etc. We also know that being overweight is a huge obstacle to pretty much all things athletic, right? So being overfat is going to inhibit your ability to express some of your strength skills, your power skills, your endurance, all of the above. And in addition to that, in order to get strong, this tying into the body composition idea, you actually have to have some amount of muscle mass, right? And so what we find with a lot of tactical athletes is we kind of get to this, sometimes I hear people call it extra medium, right? Where we're trying to figure out the right balance of movement ability, endurance, and strength where we're performing at our best. For a lot of people that, for a lot of men, that might be like around 180 pounds. In some cases, you might see guys who are very effective at heavier body weights because they can lean a little bit more into their own size, ballast, and strength. Some other people might be a little bit more effective at a slightly lighter body weight. There's not necessarily a right or wrong answer. This is where it becomes a little tricky because there's some trial and error involved where you train, you see how things are going, and you kind of figure out like, where am I generally at my best? If you have somebody who's at like a lean 200 pounds and they can run with the fastest, control, they can move, they can do all the things they need to do, and they feel good all the time, that's solid, right? And they might say, I was 170 pounds, but gaining that extra bit of muscle really helped. Great, right? And so we kind of start looking at the aggregate and start putting some standards together, and we can look at things like body composition, strength, etc. And the things that I listed in my article are kind of just jumping off points that I want people to just look at and say, these are things that I think matter. A lot of the evidence points to. And if you don't really know where to start, these are great places to start. And so number one on that needs analysis, I would say, is body composition, right? So we want to see if you're around 20 to 40 years old, holding about 10 to 15% body fat more often than not. It's not so hard that you're going to be fatigued all the time to maintain that level of leanness, but you will be relatively lean and healthy, and that won't inhibit you in any way. For older folks, like 40 plus, we kind of scoot that up by about 5 in both directions. So like 15 to 20 ish. Sorry, got off track there. And so we start to kind of put some of those things together. And that's why I kind of developed that milestone systems too. Because like you said, a lot of people are kind of scattered. They don't really know what they're doing. Sometimes they're doing CrossFit, sometimes they're doing this, sometimes they're doing that. So if you're kind of in the position where you're like, I need to do something, but I'm not really sure, first milestone, get nice and lean, right? If you haven't done that, it's a good place to start. And what does that mean? Well, if you want to get nice and lean, you're going to probably need to start a pretty rigorous weight training program, preferably a hypertrophy training program, and some type of hypocaloric dieting, right? That already points you right in the right direction, right? So that's kind of the nice thing about having some of these systems in place is because you can kind of funnel your decision making into these milestones. You go, I don't really know what to do. Okay, well, let's take a look at my key performance indicators. Where do I stand? I'm a little too fat. Let's work on that for now.
So, James, just for the layperson, explain what hypertrophy training is in the context of muscle building and a hypocaloric a diet is in terms of a calorie deficit. In fact, I probably just defined it right there. But I find in some conversation, if I use the word hypertrophy, people kind of look at me sideways and I say hypocaloric diet, and they say, well, what does that mean? So that being milestone number one, and building the lean muscle mass through strength training, resistance training, and using progressive overload as part of your milestone. I want to back up just a little tiny bit here. We talk about your needs based training priorities and injury prevention.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we see a lot of sprains and strains and we carry gear around, whether it be on our duty belts and other specialized equipment, particularly those in special operations and SWAT operations as well, and other tactical stuff. So, what are some of the things that we can do to kind of mitigate in all of this while, okay, so we're getting on firstly the priority of addressing body composition, but all in the meantime, good grief, if you're going to injure yourself and create a lot of fatigue during training itself and lifestyle that, like every other busy professional, law enforcement officers work 12-hour shifts, typically have families, typically have
Yes.
commutes, typically have finances and other life things going on. So, then that translates into, unfortunately for me, and those who get any conversation with me knows how I prioritize sleep, and I emphasize that over most everything else. And so when you're underslept, everything, kind of, it's you're not optimal. It's not an optimal condition to be underslept and in a sleep deprived state. So how do all these things then translate into injury prevention that we see common for law enforcement?
Yeah, so I'll back up to the hypertrophy training question first. So
Sure.
that one's pretty simple. This is what most people think of as like bodybuilding style training. It doesn't have to be that, right? But essentially, we're doing sets of anywhere between 5 and 30 repetitions performed at between like 1, or we can say 0 and 4 reps in reserve. So it's a relatively high relative effort. And then the key here is doing a lot of sets. So it's a little bit more voluminous than like a traditional strength training program where you're doing sets of like 5 or less and maybe just a handful of sets. So in this case, the loads are a little bit more on the moderate to light side. The relative effort is pretty high, and you're doing a lot of sets per muscle group, per session, and per week. So tying all these things together is really, really difficult especially for someone who's not in like the exercise science world. One thing that I am very sympathetic to, especially for law enforcement, right, is we're talking about fitness stuff, right? But there's also, you guys have a huge number of skills that you need to train, a huge amount of tactical stuff that you need to train. All of that gets factored into your time allotment, your needs analysis, and where you're going to allocate your time training. So for example, right, like you might have some officers who are already scoring really, really well on all of their fitness metrics, but they suck at all their comm systems, or they suck at their like non-lethal systems, or they suck at whatever, right? And they might have to spend more time actually developing their skills and or tactics, which is a completely valid thing, right? Again, this is why we have this assessment, because you might say, I have so much stuff I don't know how to use my time effectively. You go, are you checking the boxes on the fitness side of things? If the answer is yes, you can either do more fitness if you want, or if you're lagging behind in other areas of like skills and tactics, you can train those things more now too and bring those up if they're lagging, right? That's kind of like the big glue of having all these assessments is you say, where am I good? Where am I not good? Where am I actually exceptional? And then you can allocate your time accordingly, right? So it gets difficult, right? Because we're juggling all these different things, our fitness, our skills, our tactics. You mentioned injury management. How do I make sure I'm not getting hurt all the time? Well, it turns out strength training just by itself, whether you're doing hypertrophy training or actual strength training, is a huge way of preventing injuries, right? It's going to strengthen your muscles, but it's also going to strengthen your connective tissues and acclimate you to heavier loading. So one of the easiest ways people get injured, whether it's in sports, training, or on the job, is when you have a big change in either intensity or volume. So you do something that's way harder than you're used to doing, or you do a lot more of something than you're used to doing. Those are the two like main tickets to injury, right? Resistance training helps you acclimate to both like volume and intensity of these like high intensity efforts that you'll do on the job, which is really good. It also just makes you less likely to die in any circumstance, which is a cool fact that's been coming out lately. And another thing that people should be considering is if you have a utility belt or you're wearing a vest, right, that adds a big load carriage to your system that you have to acclimate to a little bit. And so I actually recommend sometimes it might be good to do kind of like a preemptive loading pattern before you're having to actually be wearing the stuff full time. If you can, if you know, like if you have time to prep for it, like get used to wearing a weighted belt or a weighted vest and kind of progressively overload that over time so that when you're in your full kit and you're on the job every day, it's not going to be as brutal and overwhelming. We see data from things like Army basic training where they put people with like, 90 to 100-pound packs on and ask them to run. We see huge instances of stress fractures in like the hip, spine, femur, etc. Because again, the delta, the change in the loading or the volume was just too high. And so you can ramp these things up slowly and make sure that you're not exceeding your capability as you're preparing for more rigorous stuff.
Sure, absolutely. And the kind of key that you either mentioned outright directly or hinted at was progression and progressive overload, because of those very the onset of some of these injuries, or the just the kind of the performance related, or the changing of the load, the intensity, and the performance itself that can actually lead to some injury then.
Mm-hmm.
So when we talk about then training and building into a program addressing body composition, then speed, power, and injury prevention, which strength training, resistance training can take care of a lot of that, as you just mentioned. So when we talk about periodization, it certainly can and does apply to not just training and nutrition, but it can apply to all aspects of life,
Yes.
particularly when scheduling and planning, as a lot of police officers and geez, not just our profession, but what kind of overtime assignments can we work? Because, everybody needs to make ends meet, support their families, and there are times,
Absolutely.
particularly in our city, where, actually, now that I give it some thought, is pretty much 12 months out of the year, we have the opportunity to work a lot of stuff, and people do a lot of stuff and try and keep up with as you just mentioned, all the trainings and skills that we have to, commutes, long shifts, sleep deprivation. And now we're faced with the opportunities to go ahead and work and overwork in some cases, and throw everything we have, and which is a recipe for burnout and injury, and overreaching in a general sense. So how can we explain what periodization is and how we can apply that to not just training and nutrition, but lifestyle in general?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of people have a lot of different things to say about periodization. They get real fussy with the definitions. For me, right, it's just like the strategic manipulation of your training variables so that you can have predetermined outcomes, right? Meaning like I want to be gaining fitness at this time, I want to be performing well at another time, and we just sequence our training variables accordingly. So a lot of the times this stuff kind of sounds pretty straightforward, like, okay, let's work on fat loss or gaining muscle, right? The trick with working in law enforcement is that the training and nutrition that you need to do to either lose fat or gain muscle is really hard. It's rigorous. You are going to be fatigued all the time. That is a big problem. As you said, you might need to be ready to go at the drop of a hat. And if you are carrying around a lot of either like what we call systemic, like your whole body, or local fatigue, you might not be as effective on the job as you need to be, right? So there's kind of a trade-off here where we got to like make gains in like losing fat, gaining muscle, gaining strength, but we can't do it all the time because there are times throughout, the year where I need to be more prepared than others. And this is where kind of that data collection can be really helpful. So with law enforcement, we're typically looking at like summer times is where we see a lot more engagement with the communities, right? Whether it's crime reporting or deployments, we see police being a lot more active during the summertime. Now, that's going to be a little different for everybody, right? This is where having your own departmental data can be helpful, but broad strokes, we see generally people are going to be a little bit more active in this summer seasons and a little bit lower in kind of like the winter seasons, right? Why does that matter? Well, during that summertime, there's a higher probability that you might have to act uh, as at your peak readiness at any given time, right? And in the winter times, maybe less so. Not to say that it ever goes to zero, but maybe just not as frequently. So that gives us a nice framework where we say, okay, I can afford to be a little bit more fatigued and a little bit more rigorous with my training in those down times throughout the year. And that might be a really good time to be gaining muscle, losing fat. But as I start to get into the spring, summer, I might start to make some of those transitions where instead of training for hypertrophy and muscle gain, I might actually switch to like strength or maximal strength because that's going to be more related to your performance on the job. And if you're kind of going through the milestones, right, you might even move into more like power speed type stuff towards the mid to late summer, right? Which is when you're going to be, again, probably most active. And so this gives you kind of a little bit of a framework to think about like, okay, when am I going to be getting after it on the fitness side? And then when am I mostly going to be like peaking to make sure that I am at peak readiness for my job performance? The problem that you mentioned that I think is 100% valid is that sometimes people want to pick up those extra shifts. People want to work more, make more money, completely understandable. And then it becomes difficult to actually start to make compromises for fitness because you have to be on all the time, right? So I would encourage people to distinctly like take some lower periods throughout the year in terms of your workload if you can, so that you can either recuperate and kind of get back to normal if you've been really stressed out, or if you have more bandwidth, you can do much more rigorous, harder training that will support your on-job performance. Easier said than done. As you said, people got to pay the bills. They want to pick up extra shifts where they can, but I would encourage people to just think about it strategically in terms of like, when do I really want to be getting after it on my job? When is it going to be a little easier for me to do more fitness? It doesn't mean you have to be like busting your hump on the fitness side of things 100% of the time. That's not what we're saying at all. We're saying some of the time you should be getting after it in the gym. Some of the time you should be a little bit more focused on doing your relevant law enforcement fitness skills tactics stuff.
So, given all this, and you've talked a lot about really progressive overload for short, getting at it, periodizing appropriately, and how to build in your priorities based on your needs analysis. So, one of the things I know that is your specialty that I've been keeping up on, whether it's via literature or your published through via audio or video podcasts and other programs that you've been on, is recovery.
Mhm.
And so how does one, and we'll say you could say recreational athletes for one, but how does a your standard police officer who is given consideration to everything you had just said, between shifts, between workouts, during periods of downtime, or those periods where we're pulled back a little bit on the fitness and the exertion, and then times for ramping up. How then can you kind of incorporate some recovery modalities so that we can be ready for performance, ready for our families. And I really think and I believe that you're gonna put my favorite on there is sleep, and
Yes.
the prioritization of that.
Absolutely.
So talk a bit about that if you could.
Yeah, so there's a lot of different things you can do. Some of them are a little bit more straightforward than others, right? Sleep is number one, right, in terms of what's going to have the biggest downstream impact on performance and your overall health and well-being. Sleep, hands down, right? So we have to make sure we're allowing ourselves enough sleep opportunity. Even better, trying to get into a really good sleep hygiene routine, like wind down routines, keeping your room cool, keeping it dark, right? Like reducing your stimulants throughout the day, maybe reducing hydration later in the day if you have to go pee all night, right? Things like that. So, any ways we can increase our quality of sleep, even better, right? And so, everybody talks about sleep. We all know we need to do it. It's just one of those things. I think the best way to start if you're having a hard time with the sleep is to set a hard wake timer, right? Because that's going to automatically start recalibrating what we call a sleep pressure. It's like your feeling of tiredness or wanting to sleep throughout the day. And if you are getting up early, right, it'll naturally kind of push your bedtimes a little bit up accordingly. So that's usually a good place to start if you're having a hard time. If you can't do that, right, start trying to give yourself more sleep opportunity, and it will take a couple weeks for you to adjust. After that, we start getting into a little bit more of you have to make a kind of a concerted effort on the recovery side of things. So I like to break this into two big categories. I like to think of relaxation as one thing and stress management as another thing. So on the relaxation side of things, right, we're basically saying I want to go from a heightened state, like physical, mental arousal level, to a lower state, right? I'm going from high to low. And this might be something really, really simple, just like making sure that you take some time out of your day to do things that you enjoy that are relatively easygoing activities. Like if you have hobbies, things that are relatively low stress, even just spending time with like your friends, your family, your loved ones, your pets, things that where you're feeling stressed and they help you kind of relax. That might be listening to music, it might be watching movies, it might be doing something constructive, like you might be building something in the garage, right? Any and all of the above. Like find little opportunities throughout the day where you're not distracted with your work, you're not distracted by other stressful things. You can just do something that you want to do, kind of a very what we call autonomous, meaning like you are choosing to do it, you want to do it, and it makes you feel good, right? Those type of activities are going to be really, really good. And sometimes if you can just do like 45 minutes to an hour per day of just like me time to decompress a little bit, that goes a huge way. The more time you can spend in that more relaxed state rather than like a heightened stress state all the time, probably the better, right? On the other hand, we kind of have our stress management systems, right? And this is what I think is really, really important with law enforcement officers because you are in stressful situations all the time and still have to deal with it, right? So stress management says, I'm in a stressful situation, whether it's physical or psychological stress. I need to still be able to perform at my best and get through this situation to best serve myself, right? And that's where we can start to see things like mindfulness practice can be really good. Cognitive behavioral therapy can be really good methods, and I really encourage people to look into that if they haven't done so already. These are strategies that will help you when you're in the moment recognize why you're feeling bad, pull back a little bit and say, I'm feeling real shitty, I'm feeling real anxious, I'm feeling real stressed. It's okay. I should feel that way right now. And here's how I'm going to just mentally do a couple exercises, walk myself through it so that I can still be effective, right? Those are two really, really big ones that I generally try to point people to right away. And to be honest, those take a lot of effort. So I'm not saying this is like a quick fix, right? This is one of those things you have to be very introspective. You have to put in a decent amount of time and effort in your free time. It's not easy. Those are going to be really, really helpful though. Other things you can do. I'm really big on planned rest. Like, I think this is something that we all probably do a really, really poor job about. We just mentioned that when we were in our previous section we were talking about, but like have times throughout the year where you have some downtime, where you take that vacation time, where you go and do something fun with your family, do something that's not super stressful, whether it's taking some time off work, taking some time off the gym, a little bit of both. Take that time to decompress a little bit. People are just, I find a lot of people, especially in law enforcement, are just redlining their life all the time, where it's like always heightened, always stressed, always go, 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 go. And that's okay in short periods, right? That's fine to do in short little bouts. You just can't live that way, right? And the more you're able to back off from that, the healthier you'll be, but also the better you're going to be able to perform and the more motivation you will have to get back into doing the harder stuff, right? So taking some of that planned rest time, either throughout the day, throughout the week, throughout the year, however you want to set it up, like make sure that you have distinct periods that are meant for you to recuperate both physically and mentally. So you're not just grinding all the time.
And that does indeed take an effort and to pay attention to what you are and kind of what you're made of. Steve Magnus wrote a book, Two Hard Things. I know you're familiar. You've
Love
spoken
that
about it
book.
before, and it's a great text. One of the things that people understand, and it has been shown that people who have the concept of having an internal locus of control is they have lower instances of anxiety, depression, and are able generally to manage prioritization. And it's kind of, a big component of that is taking responsibility and understanding. They have a sense of agency, and they control their own outcomes and their
Yes.
attitudes and emotions. We understand emotions are fleeting. We are not defined by our emotions. Particularly, we can be a little bit more, people perhaps a little bit more sensitive in the sense that the detection of something that's lurking behind or under the surface, and then can kind of take some of the steps and strategies. But that takes some introspection, and that takes some
Yes.
self-awareness where you have certain parts of the population, and I'm not directing this at any one particular profession or anything, but they feel like the external forces are what dictate what happens in their lives and what their outcomes are. But if we, to your point, can make that effort to identify those things in our lives, the stressors that we do have, whatever the profession may be, and in our case, we can identify some, and also attribute it to our kind of physical demands and our own kind of requirements, and kind of base your relaxation over here and your stress management over here. But that does take some self-awareness as well, and you're not
Totally.
necessarily dependent upon, and a lot of people are dependent upon other people to tell them, okay, well, this is what you need to do, this is what you need to do, which is fine. We all got to seek out professional guidance. And however, we're all responsible with of course, a few exceptions. There are some things that are beyond our control. But for the most part, in our day-to-day living and the decisions that we make and how we prioritize things and the consequences that come with them are of our own. So I think that's even part of this, or we're kind of even start.
Absolutely.
It's kind of okay, well, when we come to physical fitness standards, it's like, okay, well, this is where you're supposed to be, and here's how to get there. Okay, fine. You need to take it a little bit further.
Yeah. Yeah, so for your listeners, what you're really getting at here is what they call self-determination theory, which I am a huge proponent of. It's an amazing tool for just like living a pretty generally happy, fulfilled life, but also it's a great stress management tool, right? So the more, and this is again, as you said, it takes a lot of thought and a lot of introspection. But the idea here being when you are in a negative mood state or in a heightened stress state, right? The more that you can do to exert autonomy and control, the better you will generally feel. Now, I'm not saying that in a hostile way, right? But the more like steps that you can take that kind of bring back things into your locus of control, more often than not, the lower your stress will be, the better you will feel. So instead, so earlier today, I was trying to build a website and I was getting real pissed off because I couldn't figure out how to do it, right? And I had to take a break, think about it like, all right, what are the things that I'm stuck in this website system. I can't just sit here and be in a bad mood all day. Let me just like tackle the easiest possible thing, which is like the about me page, which I already had something I could just copy paste right into it. And I was like, okay, I got that one done. Now let me take a look at this other thing. And you kind of go through and say, and then it kind of builds this positive feedback loop of like, okay, I was feeling stressed. I did a little something that made me feel better. Now I want to feel a little bit like I'm ready to take on something a little bit harder, right? So this is something I think is really, really important because a lot of people get discouraged on the fitness side of things, right? And they go like, I'm fat or I'm out of shape. And like, it just feels like the activation energy is so high to figure some of this stuff out. And it's like, no, you can take some really, really simple steps to start getting on the right track. Like if you're overweight and you haven't really done any nutrition stuff, like Here's a simple thing, like just download a nutrition tracking app, whatever you care, whatever you want. MyFitnessPal, there's MacroFactor, there's a ton of other ones. Just start logging what you eat. Don't even do a diet yet. Just log what you eat. And now you have a better sense of like what your daily nutrition tends to look like day to day. And if you want to change it, now you have some data to work with, right? A couple other easy ones is like just getting your step counts up there. A lot of people, especially for people who are sitting in a patrol car all day, just don't move around a whole lot, and so sometimes just taking the time to like, let me just make sure I get up to like 10,000 steps or so every day, scale that accordingly, but that's usually a good milestone. Really, really simple, and you'll start to see results immediately. Your capacity to do exercise goes up, your mood and affect go up. You probably will start losing some weight too, which is really, really good. Those are all simple things. If you're not a gym rat already, that's fine. Get a Planet Fitness membership or something. Who gives a shit? You don't have to do any of the hardcore stuff. Obviously, we want to funnel you to the most optimal choices, but very often the most optimal choice is just taking that first step and doing something. Something is going to be much better than nothing. And so I find that that can be really, really helpful when you're feeling discouraged or feeling kind of lost. It's like, okay, pick something to aim at. It doesn't have to be the most exactly correct thing. That's why I did the milestone systems. It's like, here's what you can aim at, really, really quick, simple. Okay, I need to lose some weight. What do I need to do? Well, you need to get on the weights so you can preserve your muscle mass. You need to reduce those calories so you can start losing the weight. And then go from there, right? And then you can decide what you want to do from that point on. But those little decisions where you say, I'm not just going to be fat anymore. I'm going to like at least start thinking about what I can do. We'll start spurring more motivation, more positive feelings to keep taking further steps and getting better. You see your strength going up. You start looking in the mirror and you're like, damn, I'm trying not to swear. I look sexy. I look good. I look hot, right? That's great. Those are all good things. I know it's kind of silly, but they will keep you motivated to wanting to keep doing more, right? And getting back to that self-determination theory, like take the reins. And it might just be a baby step. It might just be something tiny and bite-sized, right? But do it. Just give it a shot. And it will probably start a whole snowball effect of positive things in your life.
It's and it applies pretty much in all or most areas of your life to do that. And you had the last time we spoke, you had talked about the concept and you explained of do one thing. That was you said do one thing, right? And one of the examples you used was if you got all kinds of papers and your desk is a mess, clean up your desk. If you got that one bill sitting over here that needs to be paid, pay that bill. I find something very simple, and as you said, there's kind of a snowball effect to it, and it one thing can potentiate another. Whereas, if we're a lot of us have had days over the course of our, I'll say adult lives, but certainly as we're kids, we just don't want to get up and move in the morning. We just don't want to either get out of bed sometimes, or the where's the motivation? And we know that we can, may have a general routine, and some may have a pretty solid structure and consistent routine, but this kind of plagues a lot of us from time to time. And so one of the things that I personally like to use, and I hope a lot of adults can relate to this, but get up and the first thing you do is brush your teeth.
Hmm.
And you brush your teeth, and you'd be amazed at then what happens right after that, and just how you can flip that switch, is particularly if you do have a fairly standard routine, and just simply doing one thing, doing one small thing, can switch you over to your routine. But then as we kind of dial it into the kind of the arena of fitness and exercise, and it's funny that you mentioned step count, because that's one of the first things, as I say, as far as nutrition goes and starting to track, even just simply paying attention, just simply
Yeah.
being paying attention to what you're eating on a daily basis. I see somebody working in my office who may end up watching this, but has a bag of chocolate covered pretzels on his desk, and every so often he'll walk in and he'll grab a chocolate covered pretzels and throw a fistful in his mouth. And I ask him, what kind of snacking have you done today? I don't know. I can tell you exactly because I sit I
Yeah.
sit right
Those
next
add
to you,
up.
essentially.
Those
Yeah,
handfuls add up.
they sure do. So simply paying attention and tracking, and there are a lot of free and paid apps that can do that. And secondarily is that you can get a very inexpensive step tracker.
Yeah.
And those who are a little bit more advanced smartwatches who, geez, they could, do a lot of the work for you, which, I don't know that I'm a massive fan of having technology do the work for you completely. But I mean, anything, if it helps to get you active and it helps to get you kind of on that road to results where you do see, okay, the changes in physique, the changes in strength, the changes in energy, the changes in mood, everything that you had mentioned that just kind of automatically come, rather than being paralyzed by, oh my gosh, there's so much I have to do. I have to be able to lift weights. And I don't know. I don't know how to eat. I don't know how to lift weights. I don't know how to run. I don't know how to train. I don't know how to do this. I'm proficient with my firearm. I can, XYZ, you name the skill. But when it comes to physical fitness and diet, it may be completely overwhelming. So starting with the small stuff and building on it from there. And it helps to have professional guidance as well, as always. And there's a million resources, whether it be online or electronically and text and coaches and things. Um, but yeah, I think that kind of the smarting, the self-determination theory, and everything you just explained, absolutely applicable in this sense.
Yeah, technology is great when it works. I agree. We shouldn't like lean on it too hard. It's great when it can reduce pain points for you. Like the step tracking is like a perfect example of just like I don't know how much I move around all day, right? Okay, well now like my Garmin watch. I don't even have an expensive watch. It just does step tracking for me. I can just look and go. I'm only at 6,000 steps today. I need to get up to 10. I'm gonna just either take a walk around my neighborhood or do some treadmill time or whatever, right? But yeah, it's amazing how it's just sometimes those little tiny things go such a long way. And for people who are starting, right, I would just like encourage you, like, just get a gym membership if you don't have one, or if your department has like a fitness center that you can use, just like show up a couple times per week and just doing it, you'll see your muscles changing, you'll get stronger, you'll see your performance going up, you'll feel more capable on the job, or at least you'll feel less shitty. That's just as good as being more capable sometimes. Those are all super quick, easy things. The changes you will feel from starting a nutrition and training program, aren't like immediate, but within like a couple weeks, you'll start noticing a difference. The first week is usually a lot of transition and routine building. But the nice thing is, as you were saying about like the teeth brushing, right? Once you start building those routines, the activation energy goes way, way down. And even when things are difficult, you can lean into that discipline just a little bit more. Whereas before, things would just go to hell and you wouldn't do all the things you were supposed to do. Once you have some structure and routine to your day, whether it's like starting with brushing your teeth or going to the gym first thing in the morning or whatever, right? That tends to get easier and easier and easier over time and more sustainable over time. And you're less likely to just say like, I fell off the wagon on my diet. I'm going to like just eat whatever I want the rest of the day. A lot of people have that problem too, right? The longer you kind of stick with something, the less energy it kind of mental energy it takes, the less bandwidth it takes. And even when things are tough, you can just kind of lean into that like discipline a little bit more and keep on track with everything.
Yeah, and then especially when you have some kind of life circumstance that comes up, whether it be some kind of a loss or a job change or
Yeah.
a marriage or a childbirth or something, some of these big things, and you kind of, that automatically just shift you off routine a little bit. And once you have that consistency in place, and you had already had the structure that had been in place before, and just the brain wiring itself, you can pop right back on track a whole lot easier
Yes.
than just kind of starting to develop new habits or new routines or new technical skill right off the bat.
Which is way harder, right? That like energy to like learn how to do new things or develop new routines is tough. And that's why a lot of people have a hard time starting or sticking with things. But once you get through that first couple weeks, that first initial barrier, man, it gets so much easier.
It does, and then particularly when it comes to some of us, who are really passionate about fitness and training and diet, and we can sit and talk shop all day about it. Becomes almost well, I say almost biologically, addictive. When we have the neurotransmitters that are at play when through hard training and developing the grit and the toughness, and then And then seeing the results. So all that is, as you mentioned, that's really motivating to kind of see the results. Now, one of the things that, and I mentioned this before we started the chat here to you, was okay, your training and whatever your sport happens to be, and I am talking to Dr. James here at the moment, is what is your musical preference on average, generally, when you are training?
Yeah, so I have kind of a weird answer. So I love like melodic death metal music, basically like really intense, sad, melancholy music. It gets me like pumped out of my mind, right? But with training, what I have actually learned is that a lot of people rely too heavily on whatever music genre that they enjoy to get psyched up for training. And that ends up not being a very sustainable way to train because you're constantly just sapping all of your energy due to that super, super heightened arousal. So, what I have been doing with myself, and I encourage like a lot of my clients and athletes to do, is to actually train not like in a cold mental state, but more of a neutral mental state. So don't pick the most arousing music. Pick something that you enjoy that's just more like fun and enjoyable. Or sometimes for me, like I'll just do a podcast or an audiobook in the background. And I find that my training goes so much better because I'm not sitting there trying to get psyched up for every single set, burning tons of mental energy and bandwidth, exhausting myself each time, training like basically to failure. You're able to actually have much more long-term sustained productive training. And I also just find that it helps you execute whatever it is that you're doing that's stressful. Whether, I mean, like training is physically stressful, but sometimes it's mentally exhausting as well because you're tired, it hurts, you got to stick with it. But if you can do it while you're maintaining like a relatively kind of, I don't want to say stoic, but like kind of mentally neutral stoic state, tends to translate really, really well into other things where you don't have to necessarily feel like you need to get quite as hyped up to do things. So I've actually gotten away from like using my favorite music while I lift and saving it for like my actual enjoyment times. And then I'll switch to like podcasts or kind of just like low key music when I'm lifting or if I just need a little bit of distraction because it ends up just it's been a huge boon for me. I've noticed so much more energy, so much less fatigue, so much better training. It's kind of crazy. I know it's a weird thing to talk about, but it works.
I challenge people to try that. I've noticed much the same, and Steve Magnus does actually t talk a bit about that as well. So it's definitely a thing. And I what I had noticed when I started pulling back on, let me see, I'm going back now is I was a competitive power lifter for 15 years or so, and I found that whether it was training with my team or training by myself, it was always heavy metal. It was heavy metal everywhere all the time, and it almost created a sense of anxiety when I would attribute and associate some of my favorite heavy metal songs when I'd hear them out of the gym
Yeah.
because I associated them with
Yeah.
I'm about to vomit from doing a set of deadlifts or something. So there's some music that even it's really kind of bizarre the way the brain works. In that there's even music now that I don't not that I can't, but I don't listen to because it's still years and years later, just those, and I could, good grief, Disturbed, for example,
Yeah.
Disturbed,
That conditioning is
any,
real. It
any,
happens.
yes, it absolutely is. And it just doesn't just go away.
Hmm.
It may back off a little bit, but yeah, there are times when, and hmm, um, shoot, I mean, I'll ask you the question, but when I find personally, and I've talked to others who've kind of experienced the same thing, and it much goes to the conditioning. But when we sit and we start to talk about, if I'm talking with somebody that I'm coaching or training, and even myself and planning my own workouts or microcycles and what we're going to be doing for the week, is these kind of not necessarily emotions in the psychological sense, but feelings of if we're talking about pressing and the elbows have been a little cranky lately, simply talking about pressing movements and programming them can actually trigger a little bit of a phantom. I mean, I guess it's not technically a phantom, but you could actually feel physically some of that discomfort when actually discussing some of these things that you feel.
Oh, yes. And this is actually a classic sign of overreaching in a broader
Mm,
context, right? So here's a really simple example I'm sure most of your listeners can probably relate to is you know you have to go to the gym later today. You know it's going to be like squats or deadlifts. And the thought of it is making you like either anxious or nauseous, where you're just like, I'm going to throw up if I have to do any more of these freaking squats or deadlifts. That is a pretty common, reliable sign that you might be overreaching a little bit. It might be actually good for some recovery time, or maybe take like a lighter day. Right now, sometimes it's not quite as severe, like you said, like talking about like pressing, and you're like, ooh, I already know my elbows are not going to be thrilled about that, right? And that's actually a great time to kind of go back to the drawing board and you go, well, my elbows aren't supposed to feel bad, right? Like, what's going on there? Should I actually be reassessing my technique? Should I use a different movement that I can do that's pain free? Those signals are really, really good. Like your gut instincts are more powerful than a lot of us realize. So when you get something like that where you're like, oh man, my elbows are going to hurt later today from bench pressing, it's like, well, maybe they shouldn't hurt. Maybe I should think about like, is my grip too narrow, too wide? Should I switch from dumbbells to barbells or vice versa, right? Experiment, play around with it. There's not necessarily a one size fits all answer. But yeah, when you start to feel that like aversion where you're like, ooh, no, that's usually a sign of like, I might actually be in a really poor state of stress. And sometimes it can be psychological stress, not necessarily like like you're not physically stressed out from doing a lot of physical labor. You might have just gone through something emotionally exhausting. Like you might have had like a really rough night on your shift. You might have had like a death in the family or spouse problems. That will have psychosomatic effects. And then if you're going through something tough like that, and you think about going to the gym and you're like, I'm going to throw up, that's actually a great time to think about like, okay, something's off. Let me just take either the day off, maybe take a lighter day. Like I'm not going to go as nearly as hard as I normally would. I'm just going to go through the motions, get a little pump, leave. Anything along those lines. Maybe even take a deload if you're already kind of familiar with how to do that. That's a great opportunity to sit there and reassess, right? And all these things tie together, right? Because that goes back to like the mindfulness training of like, are you aware enough to realize that like you're not actually in the state that you want to be in to do what you want to do, right? And it takes practice. And so listen to those gut instincts. My goodness.
and I think we all, most of us that have been around a while doing this, excuse me, have absolutely experienced that. And some of us learn, some of us can catch on and get the understanding that okay, this is the time to step back and assess, and others just keep charging on. There's there's a phrase I know it's kind of cliched and everybody's probably used it, but it's thrown around here in our gym is zero to hero. So guys when to go in, it's like I haven't been training for a while, or this is a brand new thing, or I'm gonna just I've been training my track time. I've been doing this, and now I'm gonna start, all of a sudden I want to come in here and I want to be an elite bench presser, and it's like okay, well. Zero to hero time, let's go ahead and just start throwing the plates on the barbell. And before you know it, we've had torn pecs, we've had torn biceps, we've had hernias,
Oh, that's
we've
brutal.
had all the things. And not to say that they can't happen with even really sound training. It happens, sure, but particularly with that kind of mindset and not understanding where your own personal limits are, and when you're in overreach, and particularly over, a dieted state and in a state of fatigue, or a particular muscle group or connective tissue is gotten to the point of being overreached, and all these variables that can lead to these injuries that kind of then boils down to if we are training to be good at our jobs and to be ready for our jobs, because a lot of us are passionate about the career itself and we want to do good things in the community, and for the communities that we serve. But we can't do it very well if we're injured, and we certainly can't pick up
No.
extra shifts when we're injured. We certainly
Yeah.
can't, and then so it's kind of you kind of modulate, and
That's the key
age
right there.
age, yeah, it's and age is a thing, as much as we want to deny it or not. When we start as police officers, we're a little bit more resilient, and I think in a lot of ways when we're in our early 20s versus as we get through a career, and all the wear and tear it puts on psychologically, physiologically, the muscular system and everything, as we get in through a 20-25 year career. Um, so a lot of these to consider, and then
Yeah, I want to touch on that because you nailed something that I think is really, really important and a really, really practical piece of advice for any of your listeners, right? It's the modulation, right? And what that kind of implies is that your training stuff will be, in a sense, consistent throughout the year, but it's kind of a matter of like, if you can imagine dials on a soundboard, dialing some things up and dialing some things down. For example, it's perfectly reasonable to train sprinting, right? Because you have to be able to do some sprinting on the job. Sometimes throughout the year, you might just be working on maintaining your sprint technique so you're just not super awkward Frankenstein when you get back to doing it harder later. Other times you'll be training it really hard. Same goes with the weights, right? Sometimes you're really pushing the weights. That's like when you're doing fat loss, muscle gain, hypertrophy type stuff. Sometimes it's more in the middle, right? And that's kind of like your strength based training. Sometimes it's a little bit lower. That's kind of like your max strength peaking stuff. So the things that you're doing, whether it's in the gym or in your police training, you're doing all of those things and then you're basically just dialing and modulating them up and down to what we would call like a maintenance dose, an effective dose, or like a really hard dose. And that's why all these assessments matter, because then you can start to pick your priorities and say, I'm not gonna, I'm pretty fast already. Like I'm already doing really good on my sprints. So I'm just gonna maintain my sprints. That doesn't mean sprints I stop sprinting. That just means like the amount of sprints and the intensity of the sprints that I'm doing just goes down so that I can free up more bandwidth for either more fitness stuff, more skill stuff, more tactic stuff, and it goes in both directions. So I love that you brought that up because that's such an important thing. I think a lot of people think like, okay, I'm doing like a sprint emphasis training period now, and now I'm doing a weights emphasis, and now I'm doing a cardio emphasis. It's like, no, 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 no. You're always doing some of those things. Just you're dialing it up and down accordingly based on where you are in your training cycle.
Absolutely. And so there's a lot of we'll call it, well, there's definitely information and there's misinformation, and we see it on social media a lot. What would you say, present day, and as of this, we're talking in early 2026. What would you say are some of the biggest fitness myths that are out there, kind of floating around that we're kind of seeing and people are falling prey to?
Man, there's always stuff that's kind of coming and going, right? I can kind of think of a few that are the bane of my existence, right? The first is that you need to be lifting heavy to be making any kind of progress, right? And what we see with hypertrophy training is gaining muscle is actually the long-term avenue towards gaining strength. And the cool thing about hypertrophy training is you also get stronger while you're doing it, but you can use moderate to lighter loads. It's the heavier loads that tends to cause a lot of the wear and tear, the systemic fatigue, and for some people can be intimidating, understandably so, right? And so there's this idea that you have to be doing like sets of, like 1 to 6 and lifting heavy all the time. And it's like, no, man, you can do 5 to 10, 10 to 20, even upwards of like 30 repetitions, making gains in your performance, in your muscle mass, right? And that goes a long way, especially in law enforcement, right, where you are juggling injury management as a constant issue. So if you can train using more moderate loads, that's going to be a huge boon to your body composition, to your long-term strength, and will cause less injuries all the time. So you don't always have to lift heavy. It's perfectly okay. As long as you're somewhere between like 5 and 30 repetitions at say 0 to 4 RIR, you are good. So that's a lot of flexibility. You have a lot of options. When you get into like an actual strength training phase, then you have to lift a little bit heavier, but that's just a different thing, right? Other things that come up all the time. I'm drawing a blank. Oh, it's intermittent fasting type stuff. That's one where there's not like a huge benefit to taking like a really big fasting period throughout the day. I would actually argue, especially for law enforcement, there could be like a body composition trade-off there because there's just an extended period of time where your body's not being fueled with the amino acids it needs, and that can cause protein sloughing in the acute sense. In the grand scheme of things, is it a huge deal? No. If it helps you like kind of maintain a schedule or maintain a program, something is better than nothing. But there's no magic there, right? At the end of the day, things like your calories, your macronutrient totals are going to have the biggest impact on your nutrition health, whether that's body composition or performance or all of the above, right? So taking a big gap in when you eat really doesn't make a hill of beans difference in terms of your performance. Now, there are some like autoimmune diseases where that might actually be helpful for some people to ameliorate some of their symptoms. But for your average person, especially somebody like you're working with, just evenly spacing your meals throughout the day and something that is consistent and sustainable for yourself. Usually, I recommend somewhere between 4 and 8 meals per day, relatively evenly spaced, is a great place to start. And honestly, for people who are not doing any nutrition, if your nutrition starting point is largely zero, it's like four, protein rich meals every day. Easy start. You don't have to even like weigh it out. Just make sure that you have like a nice source of protein in there. Um, and then kind of on the recovery side of things, man, there's so many things that kind of come and go. I know the red light therapy is like a big one right now. Red light therapy does seem to have some benefits to things like your skin, your hair growth, might even benefit like your eyes to some degree. In terms of what do we know if it does it have a big impact on your recovery from like your training and your fitness stuff? Unclear, right? So it does show that it can increase things like blood flow to the localized area. It's not clear whether it has the same impact as something like a compression sleeve or like heat application would have in this context. Right now, in like a injury context, there might be something else to say, but from like a pure training perspective, probably don't need to do that. That's probably one you can skip for now, or I would just say table it for now until we know more. But everybody's been going into the red light therapy stuff, and I think there are select applications for that, but probably not like as a staple for your fitness and recovery strategies.
Perfect. So, James, what are you working on now? What projects and where can we find more of you?
Yeah, I'm trying to build my own website, as I said earlier, but I suck at it. I'm terrible. So hopefully I'll have more information about that at another time. That's one of the things I'm working on. I just did a TRT guide for Renaissance Periodization that I'm hoping to publish soon. That's for people who just are interested in testosterone replacement therapy, want to know kind of what the basic ins and outs of that looks like. And then, yeah, that's kind of it. I'm still doing coaching through RP. So you can find me on the Renaissance Periodization website, RP Strength, or you can find me on Instagram at RP Dr. James. But I don't post a ton of informative stuff. It's mostly stupid stuff. It's mostly things that make me laugh. So I should do a better job about using my social media. But yeah, that's the main things for now.
Perfect. Okay. Well, I'll leave it there for now, and we'll chat more in the future, I hope. And I appreciate you once again taking the time to have this conversation with me. Always informative, James. I very much appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me again. This was awesome.
Yeah, we'll see you next time.